Hello, hello. Cognitive behavioral mapping is where I left off, page 64. Starting at the top of the page, cognitive behavioral mapping. Pretty sure I showed this already. Historically, one of the most effective means to manipulate and direct cultural normalization has been architected religions. While providing social order, organized religion can be a point of attack for mind hackers. The synthetic telepathy capability of biocommunication weapons allow for the control of leaders of religions. A country dominated by religious belief systems is very vulnerable to manipulation by other groups. All that is required is to use the voice of God weapon on an uneducated target of these technologies in order to make them believe they were conversing with God or angels, to make them believe they were conversing with God or angels. Since the feeling of direct neural linking is so foreign to most people, they naturally must attribute the experience as supernatural or to an advanced alien technology. For more specific beliefs, far more specific beliefs can be hacked. But as practiced by mind hackers, most all of the induced beliefs fall under false assumption and logical error amplification, which ultimately leads to delusional thinking, or more precisely, articulated erroneous thinking. This is why psychologists who study delusional thinking observe that the subject's thinking is complex, often has supporting evidence, difficult to talk out of, but ultimately leads to extreme and possibly faulty conclusions. To best understand this kind of hack, a more abstract decision tree model should be used. The diagrams below show two decision trees where every node has a confidence and the expected outcome. John Nash was made famous by introducing the field of game theory frequently used in military and business strategy, which has its roots in decision trees. Simply by altering either the confidence values or the expected outcome of any decision node in the tree, the final conclusion can be significantly altered. Precise neuron amplification is like increasing the confidence level in a node in the decision tree. Use of auditory and subliminal channels can change the expected outcome of a node. Hacking just these two types of variables can drastically alter beliefs and decisions, thereby controlling the actionable behavior of a target. So, and I can't see how well you're seeing this. So you have on the left and the right two columns. One's the factors of believability, and the crossover to possible decision. From the counterintelligence community point of view, all the factors in the first chart leading to believability are reduced in the public domain. The goal of the targeted individuals is to increase them until a mass believability is obtained. Assuming the observer reaches the belief state, there are greater hurdles to make them take action. Additionally, humans are irrational creatures. Game theory accuracy requires rational actors. In the previous decision analysis, it is a linear model and doesn't take into account the Lemming effect, i.e., the sheeple effect, nor irrational factors such as what belief makes them feel better. Santa Claus is a charitable man. A supreme being is watching out for me, so I don't have to worry so much, and he will stop them. By removing a culture's collective memory of events, such as by censorship of books or skewered public history education, or increasing the confidence ratios through repetitive presentation in a trusted information medium, entire societal beliefs can be shifted in a decade and even overnight. While this is more the domain of psychological and information warfare methods, the use of mind hacking the greatest people of influence in a culture can accelerate the desired change of the whole. The process of finding the people of greatest influence in an organization is called influence mapping. Physical and no-touch torture are used for many applications. One of the most prominent uses by the CIA is to probe what the person will do for revenge and then plunging these holes. This is how they brainstorm creative attacks on the US by torturing innocent people, by finding all the possible counterattacks by highly motivated, smart, creative individuals. The CIA and DOD have been able to put up defenses against them before they happen, even including how the torture victims can find justice. This also includes plugging information outlets to the public. Think about that for a minute now. Information is tightly regulated despite First Amendment rights. Are we having fun yet? Okay. There are many tactics used for subversive censorship by the CIA. The thousands of mind-hacked projects of the Department of Defense have never found a way to make the public fully aware nor understand their plight so that they might get help from their countrymen. This process of decision tree modeling has ensured that every possible mass information source, and more importantly, the belief systems themselves, have been controlled. Most importantly, they focus on strategic domestic deception for manipulating belief systems of the public and the flow of mass information to the mainstream. The internet has proven the most difficult to regulate through the various tacit and explicit control mechanisms. So to stop an individual from being heard, artificial intelligence algorithms have been devised to flood specific internet keywords with noise. Informational noise can be just inaccuracies, example, misinformation, or purposeful deception, example, disinformation, contrived to make it difficult for a researcher to find the grains of truth. These AI natural language story generators have become quite popular in the last couple of decades to counter the improved search engine companies' algorithms. Philosophy of reality versus belief systems. Oh boy, oh boy. It is important to correct a common philosophical misunderstanding in regards to manipulating belief systems of an individual or at the cultural level. That is, many believe that reality is what you make of it, or there are multiple realities, or it is often expressed as you create your own reality. This popular illogical viewpoint arises because people subjectively have experienced intense shifting of conscious perspectives in their lives. However, reality is an immutable event by definition. The conscious intelligence being limited in complexity, size, and its access to accurate data can only hope to approximately model reality. Models are inherently approximations to the one truth, reality. This is a calculable mathematical absolute. Arguments about the practical implementation of how and who represents the best approximation to truth and reality are valid, however. In a sporting event, modeling accuracy is determined by performance. The golfer that hits the ball on average the most accurately is modeling the physics of golfing closest to reality. And except for educators, from common experience, it can be generally said that someone who manipulates another intelligent being creates more errors and moves it further from reality, usually for their own benefit. Advertising is almost all based on simple belief system manipulation. This difference can best be exemplified with examples in history of how the most popular beliefs have very much diverged from reality. The Catholic Church denounced Galileo's gravity equations for 300 years. The Earth was presumed flat. Time and space were flat until Einstein's work. And wireless hacking of human minds is 30 years away. These are some of the greatest blunders of the collective beliefs in the last couple centuries. Attaining the state of ignorance for an individual or culture is the easier task. Education takes energy and resources to instill enlightenment, so it is a more highly ordered state of existence. Faulty logic. Human beings have built-in faulty logic they develop over their lifetimes. Because these errors of cognition are so common, there may be an underlying genetic reason. Many industries have been born from taking advantage of these errors of reasoning, such as the gambling industry. The majority of logical errors come in the form of tautologies and if-then conditionals. The human mind has its own symbolic logic in the equivalent of neural network patterns. We are going to look at faulty assumptions and false correlations from the viewpoints from subjective faulty logic and observed faulty logic. Let's use real-life examples from interviews to understand how faulty conclusions arise. These examples will illustrate faulty cause and effect correlations. Then we will discuss the faulty assumptions by the subjective and observer points of view. Case example 1. Every time my neighbors come home, I get tortured by invisible pain rays. My neighbors are doing it with some equipment they have. Faulty assumption. The signal is coming from nearby and nobody else is trying to make the target draw a faulty conclusion. Case example 2. Many times when I eat, someone poisons my food and I feel sick. There must be agents everywhere I go adding poison. Assumption, the sickness is caused by the food and not an external signal. Case example 3. When my cat, named Schrodinger, comes into the room, I get hurt by invisible pain rays. They must be coming from my cat. Assumption, the cat is emitting something. This target dressed her cat in tinfoil. Faulty correlations is how the game is played. Once she learned the methods of U.S. psychic warfare deception, she undressed her cat. Case example number 4. Surely, since the media will report a cat rescued from a tree, they will report on my torture. Or conversely, surely the United States doesn't have torture weapons like this, or we would see it in the news. Assumption. Similarly, how all propaganda works. Because we don't see dead bodies on the news, people don't die in wars. Case example 5. If electromagnetic fields could cause pain to a single individual, I would feel it standing right next to them. Assumption. Human brains, bodies, and nervous system can't be tuned into like a cellular phone. So the discussion question is, what is wrong with the assumptions and logic in each case? Analyze exactly. In all 4 examples, there are several assumptions made by the person, and those assumptions are not necessarily valid. The realms of the possibilities are limited in their mind, just like assumptions made by audiences when magic and illusions are performed. Example 1, they are generalizing with every time. They are making possibly faulty assumptions that invisible pain waves must be coming from somewhere nearby because it feels so intense. Example 2 and 3 have exactly the same faulty assumptions. In cognitive warfare, the strategy is to induce these faulty conclusions in the target. The easiest case to understand how these examples are created is to imagine a person with a shock collar on them. The handler trains a subject by creating some kind of pain every time some other event happens which they monitor. The subject will naturally correlate the patterns and come to their conclusion. Also, in accordance, an uninformed observer will check the food for poisons and not find any, and conclude the person is crazy for claiming such a thing. This too is a faulty assumption, since the CIA has been developing ways to creating malingering ailments and poisons. People assume that what they can't see can't hurt them. Example 4 has several faulty assumptions caused by information bubbles and containment. All governments find their way to alter their population's beliefs using news streams. All governments find their way to alter their population's beliefs using news streams. One has to learn this for themselves. The Department of Defense can order that body bags do not show up of mainstream news, for example. Example 5 is often heard from observers of targeted individuals. They assume humans have no difference that can be taken advantage of. They understand that if you place 2 mobile phones next to each other, only one will ring when called, but cannot translate that logic into humans. The goal is to make both the observers and targets make faulty assumptions and conclusions. Repeating, the goal is to make both the observers and targets make faulty assumptions and conclusions. Obviously, in warfare, this has a great advantage in order to get into the opposing commander's minds. Discussion questions. How do you design an experiment which is hardened against an external person trying to sabotage its results with false positives and negatives? How do you isolate a multivariable adapting system? My. In just a second here, we're going to go to page 71, directionary attack. A good example of a directionary attack is euphemisms and redefining the English language in real time. George Bush did this with redefining torture for what the reasonable man would. The complexity of these techniques are often seen in politics and legal jargon and used by the Ministry of Propaganda, aka Department of Defense, CIA, in the US. We are focused on the individual attacks and not so much on cultural-wide attacks of the English language itself in this context. Associating emotions with words is another important strategy. For example, if one is brutalized while the word torture is repeated over and over again, the person will respond in a seemingly irrational fashion if the word is used in common context compared to the person who never experienced torture. This is, in essence, a Pavlov's dog effect. In some parts of the country, the word liberal has been emotionally associated with negative connotations, even though its root means freedom. There are countless other examples. A dictionary attack in the computer hacking world means something completely different. Most people use common words and proper nouns for their passwords. Automated password guessing tools use the dictionary and personal information in combinations to scour through the possibilities of passwords. This is more effective than a brute force hacking technique that goes letter by letter like a combination log. Time until crack or time until decryption is an important metric in security. Purging and altering memory. The Department of Defense is now investigating drugs that will purge memory. We repeat, the Department of Defense is now investigating drugs that will purge memory. You can imagine how it would be used. They would seduce bright young scientists to do work for them and then erase part of their soul for national security reasons, of course. They can be trusted, but no one else can be. Yeah, they can be trusted, but no one else can be. This investigation is focused on electromagnetic means to alter memory and perception and not drugs that are being developed as you are reading this. Imagine if this technology was used over the entire population, from birth till death. A human would not be motivated to know the truth. It would be a type of behavior modification away from curiosity about cybernetics and mind control and could be induced into the average brain pathway over a population. Memory decays generally as a function of time, or more importantly, in terms of neural network theory, as a function of the amount of new stimulation it receives. The trick is to distract the mind from repeated focus on the topic and to not allow the target to sleep for a couple of days in order to prevent short-term memory to turn into long-term memory. One must always keep in mind the subjective experiences of the psychic soldier and the target while simultaneously comprehending the objective physics of the neurology. Here are the instructions given to psychic soldiers to erase short-term memory and alter a previous memory of the target using cerebral cortex cloning. There will be more on the topic of psychic soldier training and trickery later in the book. Sudden force changes of focus using mental distractions. Less time the brain thinks about a topic, less likely it will go into short and long-term memory. Memory decay generally decays. We start over. Memory decays generally as a function of time, or more importantly, in terms of neural network theory, as a function of the amount of new stimulation it receives. Overstimulate the target brain. To alter a previous memory, trick the target into recalling the memory, then slowly morph it into another of your choice. The new memory stays in the historical recall time frame as the original memory. This is classified in the psychology community as false memory syndrome. Electronic dissolution of memory, acronym EDOM. EDOM is a CIA program name that utilizes various electromagnetic techniques to fade memories. It involves many of the same techniques as previously discussed, but also includes dream manipulation and hypnotic states. This program is closely related to RHIC, Remote Hypnotic Intercerebral Control. This relates to our investigation of the computer science framework of hacking computers, erasing and altering memory. Thought streams, filtering, and suppression. Sorry, I'm checking something here. More amazingly, I lost control of my stuff here. Sorry, guys. Here we go. More amazingly, through filtering and thought filtering and suppression. Thought filtering and suppression can be done with this technology. Specific memory recall or even new thoughts can be suppressed. This can be useful, for example, in suppressing a nuclear scientist's thoughts to create atomic weaponry. One can think of this technique as being similar to the automated Microsoft spell check, which will correct misspelled words on the fly as one types, or in this case, as one thinks. To erase a computer's memory or filter data that comes from devices or ports is easy compared with mind hacking equivalents. Included in the CD Teacher's Edition is code that filters everything that goes to any program from the keyboard by putting hooks into it. Keystroke loggers use this technique to copy every key typed into a secret buffer for later transmission. Some viruses purposefully try to diminish productivity of the targeted computer by introducing a keystroke error every so often, but not so often as to be obvious. Brain bioamplification technologies all rely on the same principle that only allows energy or signals to be added to a mind. The reason for this is due to the diode effect and how ionic heating energy is transformed into an accelerated directional biochemical reaction. The depolarization timing of neural groups can be phase shifted to a slightly earlier firing event, but on a whole, this technique is not significant enough to be used as a dampening signal generator. So given this limitation, how can memory, recall, or thought pathways be suppressed if energy can't be taken out of the brain signal through electromagnetic field dampening of the neuron at the moment of synaptic neurotransmitter release? There are 4 approaches to get by these limitations: negative associative conditioning, accelerated depatterning, diversion, and inhibitory pathway amplification. I can't get my cigar to stay lit. One, negative associative conditioning is executed by simply attaching a negative stimulus every time the recognized brain signal is played in full. This leads to what is traditionally called repression. The pain associated with the memory causes the mind to revert all recalls of it. Rape and molestation are often events that are repressed. In practice, the CIA and mind hackers use rape scenarios and extreme torture when experimenting with this kind of repression. This is why people who report being abducted by evil aliens and experimented on say that they were often anally raped. Whether the mind programs just seemed very real to them or whether the events actually occurred cannot be determined by investigators. This technique, if applied for positive applications, could save 1 million people a year by very forcefully helping break a smoking habit, for example, far more than preventing a possible nuclear explosion in a city using the secret spying applications. 2. Accelerated depatterning. By amplifying all pathways in a host brain, except for the ones that are to be erased or dampened, rely on a basic neurological phenomenon called long-term potentiation, acronym LTP. In LTP, metabolic cellular changes occur that alter synaptic growth and sensitivity. This is the process that converts short-term memories into long-term storage. By amplifying every pathway except for those to be filtered, the neurons will alter themselves more quickly to both compensate for the overactive brain pathways and accelerate the degradation of other long-term memories or behavioral pathways. This is intuitive based on artificial neural network models where the most recent input data set causes a fading of the least presented data set patterns. Over time, all memory of the earlier learned patterns will be erased. Increasing the speed of brain activity and new pattern presentation will accelerate the depatterning and memory erasure process. So that is accelerated depatterning. So 1, negative associative conditioning. 2, accelerated depatterning. 3, diversion. Diversion is a psychological technique used by neurological weapons practitioners. Humans have a focus of attention. If that focus of attention is disrupted constantly, one can't learn or remember. The idea is during remote neural renditions, if the target says or thinks something undesirable, that their mental activity can be redirected, thereby not allow short-term memory to form. It is often called spot blanking of memory. Repeat, spot blanking of memory. The cloner needs to just clear their mind or think of something else very intensely to clone that onto the target. 4, inhibitory pathway amplification. Neural circuits have both amplification and inhibitory pathways. Amplifying inhibitory pathways is the exact opposite of the majority purpose of the mind. Filtering is the function of inhibitory pathways, and recognition is the purpose of amplification pathways, although they work in conjunction. The basic idea, in order to manipulate human perception, involves altering these types of pathways. Memory also works with these pathways. Mapping them out has been a long-running goal of the CIA's Science and Technology Division. Improving the memory of spies or erasing the memory during interrogation utilizes these pathways. Side note, interview with a Canadian project. Interviewee, during my mental mutilation and experimentation, they were able to make me not be able to mentally visualize people clapping. Interviewer asks, what do you mean? I mean, in my mind's eye, I could not visualize people clapping with their hands. Every time I tried to imagine people clapping, people would miss their hands. It was so unnatural that they could alter my free mental space by injecting images of people missing their hands while trying to clap. Interviewer, do you think the experiments could make you miss certain obvious conclusions, just like forcing images of people missing claps? Interviewee, that is the only conclusion. They don't want people to think about certain ideas like a thought police. I bet they can even subvert people from asking the important questions. Interviewer, what are the applications that you can think of for this technology? Interviewee, I've given that a lot of thought. It could keep enemies from rediscovering this technology or nuclear weapons. It may allow political control. It keeps people in a conservative place in human development and allows the CIA to keep increasing their scientific advantage. Hacking decision trees. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. X, psychic warfare strategist. The idea in mental or traditional warfare is to beat the opponent with every possible move they are allowing to make by prevailing rules, resources, and constraints. Mental warfare is an exceptionally complex, multidimensional game of chess where the rules of the game are dynamic. This is further complicated because cognitive warfare cannot easily be separated from all other forms of offensive information warfare technologies and techniques. A few of the tools used in psychological warfare and propaganda are discussed further. Psychographic mapping, decision tree mapping, population mental chatter, and swarm theory by RAND, all capital letters, R-A-N-D Corporation, are studies of information flow in the mind and populations using the rules of the sheeple effects to engineer culture, beliefs, opinions, and values. Procter & Gamble is probably the best corporation that studies this for marketing purposes. Neuromarketing is a semi-legal method in the civilian sector. Roughly every 15 years in U.S. history, a new law is passed excuse me, as the civilians learn about mind-altering technologies and feel their ephemeral concepts, oh gosh, words that were easy before are impossible now, of free will. Roughly every 15 years in U.S. history, a new law is passed as the civilians learn about mind-altering technologies and feel that their ephemeral concept of free will is molested. Side note, a couple of the authors of this book worked with MIT and Harvard undergrad students in developing different pieces of the technology that you were reading about. To inform the average person about some of the research of how to control any creature that has a nervous system, we, the undisclosed authors, will explain some of the technologies the reader is legally allowed to know about. So how does it work? There are many frameworks that utilize these frailties of human psychology. But due to the author's security clearances, we can only tread gently upon this topic or risk being tortured again by the government who betrays everyone and doesn't stand for the values of their country. Let me read that again. So how does it work? There are many frameworks that utilize these frailties of human psychology. But due to the author's security clearances, we can only tread gently upon this topic or risk being tortured again by the government who betrays everyone that doesn't stand for the values of their country. As the reader will learn, when psychographic mapping principles are applied to warfare techniques, the dark angel, the angel of death, reveals itself. Game theory. John Nash was known for his game theory, studied intensively by both academic economics and by war strategists. Eventually won a Nobel Prize for it. It is very relevant in information and cognitive warfare. The basic theory dictates probabilities of a complex game played by rational players. I'd have a drink. The idea, of course, is to win or find an optimum stalemate. Each player is tacitly signaling to the opponent with each move. When attacking an enemy in an unexpected, asymmetric cognitive war game, the objective is to destroy the opponent no matter what rational move they make. Move towards a tacit signaling of mutual benefits, or trick them into making the obvious move, which causes a loss. This takes on the adage, damned if you do and damned if you don't. These same strategic principles work in trade negotiations, war, politics, and economics. John Nash was awarded the Nobel Prize for the economic principles since no one wins warfare Nobel Peace Prizes. Most innovators never get to see the full gamut of how their innovations can be used for good or evil. But imagine how it works at the individual level with these weapon systems. The idea is to use the opponent's fears and weaknesses against them. Let's put this game into context of one CIA program called Artichoke. A program to create plausibly deniable proxy-programmed assassins. The ultimate objective is to discredit the individual, use cognitive trickery to get them to kill another target, then dispose of the programmed assassin by local authorities or any means possible. One can't hide their guilt and fear from themselves, nor can they hide the reflex of any worries of what can be done to them. This determines the focal points of attack, the techniques to spook and rout out the fears of the opposition will be discussed later in the chapters on CIA scripts. People have common fears, such as that of death, drowning, burning, pain, financial ruin, sterilization, family legacy, etc. But strangely enough, it often is the small things that create stress in the individual, such as whether they are being watched in the bathroom or what their peers think of their appearance. Financial ruin is achieved through the subjects investing in research and development to stop their torture or prove it. Additionally, of course, all passwords for bank accounts and alarm systems are known. There are ways to hide secrets from oneself, but most never figure it out, nor would they think of it due to the surprise attack. So the neurological bidirectional linking war game is unusual in the sense one can't outsmart the attacker nor oneself, especially while being neurologically scrambled and tortured. The advantage is to the surprise assailing team. The advantage is to the surprise assailing team. So, for example, in your quest for world domination, you may want to use this capability to incite wars between countries and groups to ensure they do not form a stronger unity. Isolation, divide and conquer. This might be important in oil-based regions, for example, to ensure no monopoly is formed to control this much-needed resource. Or, for example, one might want to rid your region of undesirables, such as the weed and seed program at the local level, and instigate gang wars to occur. The techniques are the same and scaled from local to international level. Most naive watchers of television will succumb to the trickery of who the bad guys or good guys are. It is also useful when programming an assassin to choose a target. The actions of the assassin will always be perceived as a lone lunatic or religious extremist by the majority of the world who are still in the technological dark ages and ignorant of these weapons. The cloak of anonymity of who is behind the programmed assassin is also a plus for plausible deniability. This is like surfing the web with cookie blockers on and bouncing the surfer's IP address through independent servers that hide the final destination IP address. However, less than a handful of countries possess the technology and reach to do mind hacking this effectively. Context switching. Emotions create the context of language and behavior. Context switching in computer science means that programs can run in an operating system with changing parameters, be it physical memory or abstract context space. This concept has a similarity in psychic hacking called shape-shifting using brain prints. Brain printing is one of the methods to identify a person in their mind state. There are unique fundamental pattern differences between human minds, as well as having roughly 4 states of sleep, trance, paranoid, and alert awake. Shape-shifting is used in split personality spies in order to infiltrate with believable personality and memory context segmentation. Even a truth-telling device can't tell the difference between personalities. This is how these kinds of mental constructs can infiltrate all security agencies at the highest levels of classification. Context switching in computer science is very related to human context switching. Emotional state very much determines vocabulary choice, facial expressions, and reactions to all stimuli. Bubbly, happy states are more attractive to other people than depressed, negativity. As an obvious example, bubbly, happy states are more attractive to other people than depressed negativity, as an obvious example. Emotional control is used to disrupt human network through negativity derived from torture and mood swings, or help create an artificial political party through positive moods, for example. The emotional state of humans is considered the primitive emotional control system, just like in every animal. In mimetic studies, it is still considered ontogeny, follows phylogeny, and how human consciousness evolves from their ancestors. Substitution of operating system files in rootkits. The BIOS is the basic input-output. The BIOS is the basic input-output operating system. It resides in programmable and not volatile memory. Using special codes, the chip's memory can be permanently reprogrammed. This allows computers to upgrade over time. However, very clever computer hackers can reflash the BIOS with their own altered code without anyone being the wiser. This computer hack can be analogized in the mind hacking world. Imagine the BIOS being the executive and operational segment of the government of any country. The BIOS is never checked for viruses or validity. Just like the military and secret agencies that use national security are top secret to ensure that they are not scrutinized. If a group of mind hackers can gain control of these programs in these unchecked areas, they gain control over the entire system. Presidents of the U.S. are not clear to know about these systems and just end up being puppets, figureheads, or vocal pieces. The U.S. secretly controls over 130 nations. See shadow governments. Computer viruses often copy themselves to the boot sector of disk drives. The reason is that the virus code will be the first program that is run during the boot process, so that it can control everything the president or generals and admirals. More centralized, hierarchical, and secretive a government is, more easily a small group of mind hackers can take over those control systems undetected. Spies from other countries that infiltrate a government are equivalent to what computer hackers do with operating system files. If a computer hacker can substitute required operating system files with their own modified code, the malicious code can go unnoticed because it resides in a hidden directory of files that most users are not skilled enough to understand. These are called rootkits. There is even a mechanism called protected files in the newer Microsoft operating system that looks for altered files in the basic operating system directory, and if it detects one, immediately rewrites an older version over it. The problem is that the original file can be altered with some hacking so that the operating system will keep forcing the malicious altered file into its own core operating system, even if the user tries to update or repair it. This might be similar to a government agency director that gets thrown out for incompetence or being suspected of corruption and the next in line being of the same mindset. Or worse, the good director being forced to quit due to corruption around them, and the next in line is the corrupt version. Hacking input-output ports, the 5 senses and motor cortex. One of the more common pranks performed on hacked computers is to force speech or music through someone else's speakers to try to embarrass them. Simultaneously hacking all computers in a network and forcing speech out of them in a repetitive loop has kept many a mischievous hacker entertained for hours. It can be performed on a network Unix, and that's acronym UNIX system with the following code if you have the privileges. And now it's referring to the Teacher's Edition, which I'm not working from. It can be done on a networked Windows system using something like this, Teacher's Edition. These commands basically tell the computer to send a remote execution call on all the target machines to play a specific sound file repeatedly. It can be done on certain computers, which visit a website, or open an email depending on security settings. Similarly, if there is a microphone, video camera, or other device connected to the computer, it can be remote controlled once the system security is breached. The audio ports of humans can be verbal speech for output audio or perceived hearing for input sound. Obviously, this is one of the most important input ports in human beings for cognitive control using subliminals, hypnosis, suggestion, repetitive programming, and secret silent commands. Here are 5 techniques that have been investigated. Microwave hearing effect. 2. Audio cortex mapping. 3. Electrokinetic sonic modulation. 4. Ultrasonic heterodyning. 5. Plasma sonic waves. Fools you get, I do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. People hearing without listening, people talking without speaking. These are the lyrics from The Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. Silent sound and synthetic telepathy. Silent sound and synthetic telepathy, United States patent. 6587729. See also O'Loughlin et al., July 1st, 2003. Apparatus for audibly communicating speech using the radio frequency hearing effect. Please stay with me this long. Abstract, a modulation process with a fully suppressed carrier in it and input preprocessor filtering to produce an encoded output for amplitude modulation, AM is the acronym, and audio speech preprocessor filtering. Intelligible subjective sound is produced when the encoded signal is demodulated using the RF hearing effect. Suitable forms of carrier suppressed modulation include single sideband, acronym SSB, and carrier suppressed amplitude modulation, CSAM, with both sidebands present. Inventors O'Loughlin James P., Lori Diana L. Assignee, the United States of America as represented by the Secretary of the Air Force, Washington, D.C. How's that for theory, boys and girls? How are these patents for theory? So moving right along to page 84. Microwave ray gun controls crowd with noise. 1706-03, July 2008, by David Hamblin. A U.S. company claims it is ready to build a microwave ray gun able to beam sounds directly into people's heads. The device, dubbed acronym Medusa, Mob Excess Deterrent using silent audio exploits the microwave audio effect in which short microwave pulses rapidly heat tissue, causing a shock wave inside the skull that can be detected by the ears. A series of pulses can be transmitted to produce recognizable sounds. The device is aimed for military or crowd control applications, but may have other uses. Lev Sadovnik of the Sierra Nevada Corporation in the U.S. is working on the system, having started work on a U.S. Navy research contract. The Navy's report states that the effect was shown to be effective. Medusa involves a microwave auditory effect loud enough to cause discomfort or even incapacitation. Sadovnik says that normal audio safety limits do not apply since the sound does not enter through the eardrums. The repel effect is a combination of loudness and the irritation factor, he says. You can't block it out. Sadovnik says the device will work thanks to a new reconfigurable antenna developed by colleague Vladimir Manassin. It steers the beam electronically, making it possible to flip from a broad to a narrow beam or aim at multiple targets simultaneously. Sadovnik says the technology could have non-military applications. Birds seem to be highly sensitive to microwave audio, he says, so it might be used to scare away unwanted flocks. Sadovnik has also experimented with transmitting microwave audio to people with outer ear problems that impair their normal hearing. Brain damage risk. James Lynn of the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at the University of Illinois in Chicago says that Medusa is feasible in principle. He has carried out his own work on the technique and was even approached by the music industry about using microwave audio to enhance sound systems, he told New Scientist. But is it going to be possible at the power levels necessary, he asks. Previous microwave audio tests involved very quiet sounds that were hard to hear. A high power system would mean much more powerful and potentially hazardous shock waves. I would worry about what other health effect it is having, says Lynn. You might see neural damage. Sierra Nevada says that a demonstration version could be built in a year with a transportable system following within 18 months. They are currently seeking funding for the work from the U.S. Department of Defense. Interview with a corporate spy. I worked for Microsoft and other large software companies. My handlers told me through the microwave hearing effects if I did not put a backdoor into their databases and operating systems, that they would kill my family. I went to Homeland Security and the FBI, but they didn't care. They just said I was crazy. I never did it, and my family was never killed. I had another friend who told me how easy it was to hack into Wall Street's money networks while he worked for security for them. Again, I went to Homeland Security. They just shrugged me off. It proved to me that either they were part of the downfall of America or something was completely broken if the citizen who comes to them can't get their attention to fix weaknesses in the system. I don't care anymore what happens to this messed up country. There are too many traitors at the highest command levels to stop it now. A quite different experimental approach is based on electroacoustics. When a suspension of particles is subjected to high-frequency sound ultrasonic waves, the particles are caused to vibrate at the same frequency. If the particles are charged and hence surrounded by a diffuse layer of counterions, The particle vibration causes some charge separation and generates a measurable alternating electric field. The charge separation arises essentially because the ions are much more mobile than the particles and can respond more rapidly to the ultrasonic waves. The particles lag behind the counterons, I don't know how to pronounce that, creating a small fluctuating electric dipole, D-I-P-O-L-E. The cumulative effect of many such dipoles giving rise to a colloid, C-O-L-L-O-I-D, colloid vibration potential, the magnitude of which is proportional to the electrophoretic mobility of the particles. For basically the same reason, application of an alternating electric field to a suspension of charged particles generates sound waves, an effect known as electrokinetic sonic amplitude, ESA would be the acronym. At this point in our investigation, we have encountered a few different ways to create perceived auditory hearing without actual airborne vibration stimulation to the eardrum. Interviewer, side note, indoctrination into conspiracy. Interviewer, this is an open interview. What is the most significant part of your story? Answer, other than making me into an American Manchurian? Yes, I would say during visual and auditory experiments, I could get messages in white noise on TV and audio white noise where I was the only one who could see and hear very clearly what was being sent to me, and my ears and eyes only. Interviewer, can you give me an example? Answer, I would love to, one day during the experimentation. Interviewer, sorry to interrupt, but for the record, you were tortured, right? Of course, that is part of the indoctrination process. May I continue? Interviewer, please. Slightly annoyed, conditioned response. Remember, you asked me for this interview because we have the same alma mater. Interviewer, sorry for interrupting. Please continue to explain how they communicated to you without anyone else perceiving it. Answer. One day, approximately 3 months into my training, they contacted me in a way that I still can't explain today. I was trying to sleep after days of sleep deprivation using a rain noisemaker. All of a sudden, I could hear voices coming from the rainmaker, as clear as a radio broadcast. It was a woman's voice, but obviously recorded as it kept repeating. The phrases that were almost poetry, as I recall, said something like, call your governor, ask for the secretary, she'll bring you coffee, call your mother, talk about Dukakis. Dukakis went to Harvard, go back to school, join the astronomy department. I think that was it. It repeated over and over for hours. If I got up to walk away, I heard, get back here, in a reprimanding voice. Later, I heard them say that they destroyed Dukakis' campaign for presidency, but they never said why. I can't understand how a technology can do this. Interviewer, I can explain the science behind it. Do you think that sounds sane or is part of modern black magic? Response, F you, you're one of them. Interviewee storms out indignantly, falsely believing that the researchers of this book were part of a system that has tortured him/her. We will give this interviewee a free copy of our work to show that we were here to expose these atrocities, not to discredit them. Torture makes animals and humans distrusting. There are thousands of people tortured in the United States. They become cynical and distrustful of everyone, as they should be. Interview assessment. Many of the technologies used for this grandmaster neurological trickery requires the sensing technologies one would learn about in space exploration. The secretary in this interview was the international criminal, Donald Rumsfeld at the time. Mother is a term used by the spy industry to mean for whom you work. One can also perform a similar hack to a human mind if one had the right hardware. While the hacking is very different at the software level, the effects are the same. The current systems allow forcing a confession or speech through a human. Often it is interpreted by an objective neophyte as multiple personalities, but the in-depth investigator would have no problem finding the CIA's and NSA's thorough research in this area of interest. Even the testimony of the thousands of mind-hacked government human experiments call this capability forced speech. But forced speech is the intracerebral control of neural feedback and synchronization, not just the perceived auditory subcomponent, which is necessary in this loop. What other applications does audio port hacking in humans serve? Although this is supposed to be classified as top secret, they release this information by dishonorably and disgracefully experimenting on American citizens. Repeat, what other applications does audio port hacking in humans serve? Although this is supposed to be classified as top secret, they released this information by dishonorably and disgracefully experimenting on American citizens. Some would say even treasonously. It has become time that we take away some of the influence of these man children. I know this is a worldwide program. These are people in the U.S., so anyone in the world that's suffering, I know it's not just U.S. citizens. In previous books, we discussed many of the applications of these technologies in the field. A couple examples would be to distract a guard at his post or convey secret messages to a spy. Obviously, the most important capability of mind hacking is to be able to listen and see through the subject's eyes and ears. But before this can happen, the target mind needs to be mapped. The database of mind architecture is huge, and current estimates say that there are over 30,000,000,000 minds already contained in the so-called CIA personality database, which a Harvard psychology professor told the class was located in Colorado. But this is probably one of many duplications of the complete cognitive modeling database, since the technology has proliferated to every military arm in some form. This is the perfect lead into the next topic, spyware. One of the top privacy and security threats to computers is a category called spyware. Spyware comes in many forms like every other kind of malware. This piece of software collects and transmits information such as internet browsing habits, keystroke logging, or even real-time images of your computer monitor. Some parents install this software to monitor their children's web surfing habits. Certain government agencies often illegally use this kind of software to perform investigations on individuals. Political targets have always been of top priority by the CIA for blackmail and manipulation. The government tried to force a chip to be installed in every computer that would automatically decrypt all transmissions. This would be an example of hardware spyware. Even the Nelson ratings are collected with permission using a hardware spyware of TV watching habits. The internet and telecom infrastructures have network sniffers that certain federal agencies are allowed to use at any time. Privacy has always been an illusion, but there are some steps to make your computer less of a temptation for traditional hackers. The majority of spyware comes from Trojan horses. Most freeware is free because they include spyware that is installed with a useful piece of software without telling the end user. It is usually extremely difficult to remove this kind of spyware. Mostly the spyware is collecting information for marketing and advertising, and the only damage that is done is from the software chewing up precious CPU and network bandwidth. Other problems that spyware can cause is interference with the proper operation of other software. Sample spyware has been included in the CD for educational purposes only on the teacher's edition. Remember, compilation and even unintentional distribution of any of the software included in this CD may violate local and federal laws. Be sure to have a safe containment of any computers that you will be experimenting and studying security issues of this type. Now back to the cloak and dagger technologies of mind hacking. Information in psychological warfare is often called propaganda when used on the American people, and these techniques will be discussed a little later as more common kinds of mind manipulation strategies. The focus of this book is clearly on direct manipulation of the brain using ion heating, resonance and density reading, and cognitive modeling techniques. What is important in the beginning of a mind hack is to identify the ports, i.e. the sensory input pathways. In a continuous bit stream of consciousness, how can one identify the auditory, visual, taste, touch, and smell input port pathways to the brain? How can one identify the auditory, visual, taste, touch, and smell input port pathways in the brain? There are several unique characteristics of neural firing frequencies and phases for different parts of the brain that can be used to roughly identify sequences. But the easiest way to begin to identify the input pathways is a correlation from a known stimulus. It turns out that television is the perfect known stimulus for both auditory and visual information. Oh boy. Using a Van Eck hack on a person watching TV, and that's a name, capital V-A-N, capital E-C-K. Using a Van hack on a person watching TV or a computer monitor allows both a known visual field and audio source to be correlation with neuronal pathways and firing events. In addition, reading a book provides another way to add more data for word associations and internal vocalizations. In practice, this kind of non-stimuli is not fully necessary. Hypothetically, if one had already mapped out millions of variations of minds, one could auto-correlate the information pathways to known models. A baby learns to see and make sense of the visual world despite their missing a feedback mechanism to validate images and objects. So the self-organizing information should be obvious, but for our example, we will show how it can be done from scratch. Again, here are two mind-hacking approaches. One, auto-correlate and build the cognitive decision model based on known stimuli and proceed from there. This is a more methodical approach and might be done stealthier without the target being aware it was happening. Two, grab any patterns and do a stimulated search to grow all the known pathways. This brute force hacking approach would leave the target acting bizarrely with all sorts of symptoms of mental illness while it was occurring. In practice, the human brain needs to be in a sort of hypnotized state. The two hemispheres become out of sync. It is difficult to know if this is necessary to better differentiate the pathways or a side effect from hacking. The CIA's MIND program initially was called RHIC, Radio Frequency Hypnotic Intracerebral Control. A pulsing tinnitus is usually heard and a flashing seen behind hacked targets. This might be a way of controlling the spontaneous firing neurons. It can be thought of as a cloaking mechanism for various mental tasks, a way of aligning the target mind pathways. However, remote hypnosis weapons may just have discovered that more control over mental processes occurs when the brain hemispheres aren't double-checking the results with each other, and the misalignment is intentional but unnecessary for the mapping process. Once any part of the mind is mapped, a clone can occur or input sensor information can be transformed into traditional digital analogs for display. A famous demonstration of this was done in the 1990s. Using embedded probes into a cat's visual cortex, published in Neuroscience magazine. The cat's visual field was displayed on a computer screen. The same was demonstrated many decades earlier for the audio cortex and primitive encoding nerves from the cochlea. As the mapping process proceeds, words and meanings are further mapped from sounds and internal vocalizations. Boy. Stealing passwords. Since encryption technology has become basically uncrackable by even the highest-end supercomputers and is in the hands of every citizen, the most feasible way to gain access to a computer network is to grab the information at the source and destination points while the information is still unencrypted. Password stealers work at many levels. There is specialized hardware that can tap into keyboards at the connection to the computer and record keystrokes. There is software that hides on computers that records and reports passwords back to some location over the internet. There is remote control and monitoring software like Black Orifice, which allows one to watch what is on another computer screen. Once a mind hacker connects to a target's mind, visual information is shared, so stealing a password through visual cortex reconstruction is one possible way to get passwords. This technique of grabbing visual information is called screen scraping. Additionally, passwords are sounded out internally. This internal voice is mimicked out loud with a system called TAMI, T-A-M-I. The Stanford Research Institute first publicly demonstrated this capability of using brain patterns to have a computer speak the internally vocalized words of a human being in the 1970s. Yeah, if it's happened, it's not theory. It is difficult to keep secrets from yourself if you've been mind hacked. One way to protect your passwords is to use a random password generator that masks the password from view, such as any password. Only one password needs to be known to access the local database of passwords, which are copied to the authorization fields within the user seeing what it is. In order to grab the passwords, an agent would need to copy the encrypted database and program and use the known password to decipher them. It would probably require breaking an entry to achieve, called black band jobs. Keystroke loggers. Keystroke loggers are considered a more dangerous type of malware. The intent of this software is clear. The software collects keyboard information as it is typed by the user. There are hardware dongles that plug into the back of the computer where the keyboard connects that also collects keystroke information to be maliciously used later. Keystroke loggers use a hook into the handling of keyboard information. Sample code is included on the CD Teacher's Edition. Windows and DOS systems utilize the hooking information differently, as one would expect, so as with most malware, it must be coded to be operating system specific. What is the equivalent tactic used with mind hackers? It is far more invasive than most readers will be able to grasp without a demonstration. soul catchers, and recording the entire life of every human. A cybernetic researcher in England developed an implantable microchip called the Soul Catcher. Its purpose is to record the electrical signals of the body for a person's entire lifetime. This means that every thought and every heartbeat will be saved for eternity. Many civilian researchers don't know that a much larger wireless version is already operational. However, if the Neuralink programs are not just recording, a better name for the system would be the Soul Stealer or Body Snatcher, turning humans into robots. This is appropriately part of the military system called acronym SATAN, S-A-T-A-N. Potentially, millions of souls can be cataloged and saved. They love their religious metaphors in the Department of Defense. See the section on Noah's Ark for more detail on this project. Side note, article from London Observer Guardian. Chris Winter of British Telecom's Artificial Life team predicted that within 3 decades it would be possible to relive other people's lives by playing back their experiences on a computer. By combining this information with the record of the person's genes, we could recreate a person physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It would be possible to imbue a newborn baby with a lifetime's experiences by giving him or her the soul catcher chip of a dead person. Dr. Winter said it, British Telecom's Artificial Life team, was taking Soul Catcher 2025 very seriously. It would be possible to imbue a newborn baby with a lifetime's experiences by giving him or her the soul catcher chip of a dead person. Death has had its chips, say computer scientist Robert Uhlig. Issue number 430, Electronic Telegraph, Telegraph Group Limited, London. Earnest predictions of Ian Pearson, cyberneticist, mathematician, and physicist, head of the futurology unit at British Telecom. If you draw the timelines, realistically by 2050, we would expect to be able to download your mind into a machine. If you're rich enough, then by 2050, it's feasible. If you're poor, you'll probably have to wait until 2075 or 2080 when it's routine. We are very serious about it. It is possible to make a conscious computer with superhuman levels of intelligence before 2020. It would definitely have emotions. Immortality is within our grasp. Quote from David Smith, The Observer UK News, Guardian Newspaper Limited. What is the bandwidth to record the lives of every human being current alive? These are discussion questions. You can find the answers in the calculations appendix. One can imagine how brave a soldier could be if they knew that they could be brought back to life with all their memories, personality intact. Their consciousness could be beamed into another human, creating a remote control soldier. This is where all the remote mind control experiments are heading. Memory program. I'm sorry. I've got 7 bleed out, so I had to learn to read, write, and speak again. Now I have something else, so thank you for your patience. Memory probing. This is one of the most important techniques in computer hacking. Passwords and solutions to text adventure games, for example, are stored in RAM or on hard disk. By scanning RAM for ASC, is it II? Words, many hackers were able to cheat on text-based adventure games or find passwords that were not encrypted. Interrogations of human memory are even easier since the search function is merely an association away. There is no firewall and no further encryption once a mind is hacked and mapped. One cannot easily separate the technology from the scripts in many of the uses and practices by the agencies. In particular, this is true with mind probing and interrogations. Infamous interrogation scripts include Good Cop, Bad Cop, Wizard of Oz, Armageddon, and Alice in Wonderland roles. The technologies do provide enormous insights and benefits for the users. Predictive models of sentences and responses are often demonstrated with a high accuracy rate. See the TAMI system in the next chapter for a more detailed description of the military's software system and capabilities. Jostling the neural networks by adding a noise element can help trigger memories around a suggested focus. Bidirectional associative memory probing, acronym BAM, BAM, bidirectional associative memory probing. The most important technique in memory probing is association. By replaying a particular smell, all sorts of memories could come flooding back. Smell is, for some reason, one of the strongest memory association triggers. Flash of face or place in the target's shared visual space create several evoked potentials, such as the P300 if the target mind recognizes it. Related memories will be triggered for recording and analysis. For other interrogation processes, inductions of the hypnotic state, like obtained with sodium pentothal, can be induced by pure brain entrainment patterns, and the target doesn't care what they say or think. For example, with electromagnetic mind probing, induction of the emotion of guilt and shame can be played in a loop and will often help with interrogations and finding what memories the target may have that are associated with the feeling of guilt. This is one reason why the agencies look for sociopathic personalities, so that they are immune to this type of mind probing tactic. The cloak and dagger games have become incredibly complex. Another approach used by mind crackers is a precognitive response to recognition of places, spaces, events, and names. This can be done by EEG or functional MRI. By showing the subject names or faces, a recognition signal is given by the brain without the subject having to be asked any questions. With more sophisticated remote EEG cloning technologies, the subject's newly adapted extra senses can be shown a combination sequence until recognition events occur. The brain of the subject will often automatically fill in the remainder of the data of interest through subconscious association. So, for example, if the subject memorized a combination lock, the information extraction specialist, psychic driver, would present a sequence of numbers to the mind of the subject would be perceived as visual. When the first two-digit number was recognized, it is locked in and he/she proceeds with the second number. In a bi-directional associative memory, sometimes the remaining digits will subconsciously be filled in and perceived by the cloner as visual or auditory. This mind-cracking technique also works with faces and names. The target mind of interest will alter a genetic face in the shared visual workspace into the one of interest. Extracting floor layouts of secret bases, for example, can be done as well as using these techniques. Self-destruct algorithms, side note, an interview with one of the 650 identified government projects. Quote, "We can make anyone a drug addict. This is a quote now. "We can make anyone a drug addict living homeless under a bridge. What do you think we will do with you?" They said it to me before the mind erasure process. The Department of Defense calls these tactics self-manipulation and thereby hopes to get around the laws of murder through indirect and psychological manipulation of the target to commit suicide. Repeating, the Department of Defense calls these tactics self-manipulation and thereby hopes to get around the laws of murder through indirection and psychological manipulation of the target to commit suicide. There are some really damaging malicious payloads that took very reckless minds with which to come up with. Disk drives can be thrashed, CPUs can be overheated, other chips erased, monitors set to direct their electron gun outside of the viewable screen, furthering their deterioration. Not to mention disk drives can be purged. These are some of the worst possible scenarios, and of course self-destruct payloads have their analogs formed with computer-human viruses and malicious programs. Many computers control robots, missile defenses, power grids, and building environment controls. One might imagine how much damage could be wreaked if one of these systems were hacked. Dams could be made to flood a downriver city. But in the focus of mind hacking using a computer science framework of analysis, the idea is to destroy the person, economy, or culture by implanting ideas in their collective consciousness via television or direct neural entrainment. America's biggest export is its culture. Suicide bombers, psycho bombs, staged indirections. Traditionally, the CIA killed people by staged car crashes, falling off of buildings, staged suicides, and heart failure. But indirection to avoid these well-known patterns has become their favorite. Targets are set up to be disposed of by local authorities. Many people try to create publicity stunts to get national attention and to get justice for their torture, brainwashing, or child murder by the government through litigation, suing, or journalism. But as one CIA agent said, quote, "It simply won't see the light of day, and even worse, we can lock them up in a psychological ward, and their words and writings, if articulate, hushed and censored." Every government uses these techniques to quell the truth and cloud the patterns of abuses and usurpations of power. The internet and alternative media has provided another outlet for people to find relevant and important information outside of the propaganda mainstream media. This is more of a threat to the forces of censorship than books or newspapers. Suicide bombers are a type of programmed assassin. It is a popular method amongst poorer countries who don't have missiles and grenades and remote drone airplanes. Like the kamikazes, they use traditional forms of persuasion and coercion to convince people that they are doing it for a greater good. Excessive patriotism and religious zealotry are the usually psychological drivers and control mechanisms. But China, Russia, the US, and North Korea have developed some very powerful hypnosis based on torture and splitting personalities to create Manchurian candidates. The game has gone even further now that it can all be done wirelessly anywhere in the world. The CIA experiments on behalf of the Department of Defense in the field of research, and it has landed them in the hot seat several times in history. Before President Ronald Reagan, mind manipulation subjects were locked up in mental hospitals where the experimentation could be done out of the public view. He signed a bill to shut down many of these hospitals, and most likely in retaliation, a psychobomb programmed assassin named John Hinckley was sent to shoot Reagan. Of course, the public is only allowed to believe it is just random people who go nuts on killing sprees. This technology is still supposed to be kept secret from the average Joe. The people chosen for MKUltra and Artichoke experiments, according to the documents, are usually well-educated, roughly 35 years of age, and easily fits into social groups. Coincidentally, a mental illness has an onset Coincidentally, mental illness has an onset of exactly 35 years of age. Once the assassin makes an attempt, they will be disposed of by local authorities according to the documents released through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Aggression signals, torture, psychopathic and terrorist brain print personality profiles are the general mix that create the desired violent individual or group of people directed with a little cognitive mapping and mental trickery coaxing. Suicide through torture and depression signals. This book will refrain from commenting on the obvious moral implications and shameful, disgraceful, and dishonorable conclusions people would come to if it were fully known how often these techniques were tested on random citizens to improve on the technology and scripts kill effectiveness and to illegally murder large numbers of people in the last 40 years. But our researchers concluded that depression and suicidal subliminals were the first killing technique at the beginning of this top secret research. Suicide, whether staged or intentionally induced by this technology, is the most plausible denial way that the intelligence community does its cleanup. With just the psychological techniques of the micro-hearing effect, they can talk the target to their death. But according to Jim Keith, a researcher who is now dead, they can use a 6.6 hertz brain entrainment to create depression and despair in targets, increasing the effectiveness. My. Amplification of destructive behaviors and addiction pathways. Speeding in a car, creating alcoholism, and heavy smoking are the most common types of signals that can be amplified due to the plausible denial and unnoticeable statistical patterns. But many other patterns of induced risky behavior are in the manuals of trickery in the CIA. Very few have the expertise or necessary equipment to do this kind of testing, again for obvious reasons of lack of financial resources or access before the death penalty was executed on them. Shutting down and stressing the subsystems. Excuse me. Many computer programs are not stress tested. Quality assurance software divisions load test applications, networks, and databases against program is the objective. But crashing a computer doesn't necessarily kill people under warfare conditions. Redundant systems for failover are the usual method to handle unexpected conditions. Catastrophic failover can be compared to a shadow government taking over. If a corporate systems, the catastrophic failure data centers are located far away from the active ones. Sorry guys, but I can't, my cigar lit. Malicious software can wear down the disk drive by thrashing it and over-exercising the mechanical parts. Other techniques involve overclocking the CPU, which overheats it and destroys the chip. Our focus is on the individual mind, but obviously scaling the model to governments and other organizations works just as well. There are many ways to destroy the human body and mind through these kinds of extreme stresses. Using neurological weapons, the brain can be damaged through high, constant cortisol levels and neurotoxicity of overexcitement. There are many ways to destroy the human body and mind through these kinds of extreme stresses. Using neurological weapons, the brain can be damaged through high constant cortisol levels and neurotoxicity of overexcitement. This leads to neurotic, paranoid, schizophrenic symptoms. Similarly, the heart is damaged through increased secretions of adrenaline over long durations of time. The heart can also be entrained to dysfunctional beating patterns. The heart can also be entrained to dysfunctional beating patterns. The Russians wrote about this psychic warfare technique in the 70s, which was published widely, where a runaway adrenal process can be started in the brain, basically killing the target by a remote control heart attack, an extended panic attack, and spooking them to death. Physical health can be stress tested. Trying to overstress the system to cause damage is the objective of this technique. Damaging the plumbing of the cardiovascular system and overstressing it is a popular method for silent kills using neurological communication weapons. Heart failure, blood clots, and strokes. Moscow's remote-controlled heart attacks. Side note, the researchers of this book, studied the effects of over 650 people in the United States being experimented on against their consent for human effects and efficacies of these weapons. One of the common experiments conducted on the subjects is perfecting remote heart attacks, arrhythmias, and other cardiovascular disease caused by prolonged stress, depression, and repatterning heart beating chambers over time. When you read, you can't smoke a cigar. Determining time until failure, acronym TUF, tough. Determining time until failure is an important metric in these weapon systems. All of these variables lead to congestion, heart failure, and many other kinds of silent, plausible deaths. Unfortunately, the more plausible and silent the death amounts to the slowest torture to death known to humans so far. Particular sociopaths in the Pentagon and CIA order the perfection of these weapons on the world's population, including in their own country. They hide amongst the good Americans and taint all their reputation. This is the second of David Hamlin's two-part series on plasma and electromagnetic weapons. The brain has always been a battlefield. New weapons might be able to hack directly into your nervous system. Controlled effects is one of the Air Force's ambitious long-term challenges. It starts with better and more accurate bombs, but moves on to discuss devices that make selected adversaries think or act according to our needs. By studying and modeling the human brain and nervous system, the ability to mentally influence or confuse personnel is also possible. The American military may want to attack the nervous system with pain rays and laser plasma pulses, but they're not the only ones. The Russians have long studied such systems too, including one weapon that could, in theory, remotely trigger heart attacks. In 2003, at the Second European Symposium on Non-Lethal Weapons, Anatoly Korolev, I don't know, I apologize, and his colleagues from Moscow State University presented a paper with the snappy title, Bioelectrodynamic Criterion of the MLF Effectiveness Estimation and the Interaction Mechanisms of the Multi-Layer Skin Tissues with Electromagnetic Radiation. This is a study of how radio frequency weapons like the American Active Denial System affect the skin. After wading through a mass of technical data showing how complex the interactions are, we reached the punchline. The sensations modality, pricking, touch, pressure, goose flesh, touch, burning, pain, etc., depends on the field parameter and individual concrete human being factors. As a matter of fact, we can really choose the non-lethal bio effect. The effects include sensations similar or function, including information transfer to the organs of control. At the same conference, V. Makunin of the Trimus Engineering Center in Moscow described electronic equipment for complex influence on biological objects. And when he says biological objects, he means you and me. His laboratory apparatus uses a modulated beam of radio waves to produce what he terms disorder of atomic nervous system, put forward as a possible non-lethal weapon. Makunin notes that there is no general agreement on how EM waves disrupt nerves. He mentions ion channels similar to those in the plasma paper, but he certainly seems to be seeing the same effects as American researchers. But it need not be a non-lethal weapon. Makunin also mentions the effects of change of electrocardiogram and what he calls function break of heart muscle. The vulnerability of the heart to electrical stimulation, including that produced by EM waves, is well documented. A lethal device would interfere with the electrical potentials that keep the chambers of the heart synchronized, producing fibrillation and rapid death. A death ray doesn't need to be a truck-sized laser that reduces the target to a smoking heap. A small device that stops the heart will do the job. Little has been openly published in this area in the public domain, but this may be the tip of the iceberg. We are likely to be hearing more in the future, especially if the Russians manage to find funding. I don't think we need tinfoil hats just yet, but a layer of conducting mesh. Wow. I don't think we need tinfoil hats just yet, but a layer of conducting mesh built into body armor might save a lot of heartache in years to come. From David Hamblin. Secondary and tertiary diseases caused by prolonged stress. I'm feeling stressed because I can't talk and keep my cigar lit. Disease induction such as diabetes, cardiovascular, and cancer can all be triggered by cell signaling mechanisms controlled by electromagnetics. Adrenochrome damage and adrenal burnout, leaving the target a lethargic, sluggish schizophrenic. These are similar symptoms that many were described as having after being tortured in Guantanamo Navy base. Cell signaling is part of a complex system of communication that governs basic cellular activities and coordinates cell actions. The ability of cells to perceive and correctly respond to their microenvironment is the basis of development, tissue repair, and immunity, as well as normal tissue homeostasis. Errors in cellular information processing are responsible for diseases such as cancer, autoimmunity, and diabetes. In cardiac muscle, Gap junctions between adjacent cells allows for action potential propagation from the cardiac pacemaker region of the heart to spread and coordinately cause contraction of the heart. Many cell signals are carried by molecules that are released by one cell and move to make contact with another cell. Endocrine signals are called hormones. Hormones are produced by endocrine cells and they travel through the blood to reach all parts of the body. Specificity of signaling can be controlled if only some cells can respond to a particular hormone. Paracrine signals, it's spelled P-A-R-C-R-I-N-E, signals target only cells in the vicinity of the emitting cell. Neurotransmitters represents an example. Some signaling molecules can function as both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. For example, epinephrine and norepinephrine can function as hormones when released from the adrenal gland and are transported to the heart by way of the bloodstream. Norepinephrine can also be produced by neurons to function as a neurotransmitter within the brain. This description of cell signaling mechanisms helps one understand how diabetes can be induced, and the remote heart attack weapon works by both stimulating the adrenal gland through neural entrainment Sorry, guys. That's what I get from multitasking. I'm going to start over. This description of cell signaling mechanisms help one understand how diabetes can be induced, and the remote heart attack weapon works by both stimulating the adrenal gland through neural entrainments while simultaneously stimulating contraction of blood vessels and irregular heart activity. Stimulating neurotoxicity is part of the set of signals used for menticide. Many diseases can be induced with just complex modulated radio waves. Cancer induction takes longer to kill the targets, but useful in silent genocides over populations. The CIA has developed new subrace viruses for such uses. So I think we'll stop at page 106, and I thank you for stopping by.